Topic with a little bit of a serious note. I have a confession to make. I am in recovery. I am a recovering technical recruiter. Now, let me just start with saying that I love this industry. I've been in recruiting for 10 years in my career, and I've recruited for Fortune 500s, global staffing firms, boutique agencies, and high-growth startups. I felt the elation of hiring our dream candidate for a mission-critical position, and I felt the joy of truly transforming someone's life by offering them their dream job. I've also felt the consistent, soul-crushing pressure of managing 17 open recs while being denied training, resources, and tools to manage the minutiae of the recruiting process. I felt the condescension of out-of-touch leadership who found our recruiting and culture events cute and didn't recognize that without them we wouldn't have had the amazing teams that we did have. And I've also felt the sting of reading developer blog posts about how awful tech recruiters are, and I've been in tech meetup groups where I've introduced myself as a recruiter and felt the entire energy shift and suddenly finding myself feeling like an outsider. And that basically is it, is that 10 years into this industry and I still felt like an outsider. I just simply didn't speak the language of technology. And as a recruiter, a key requirement of my job was to talk to people. So that meant I was perpetually uncomfortable, perpetually underperforming, and ultimately it's what led me to burnout. 10 years into the only career I'd ever known, and I was done. I had hit rock bottom. And for anyone who's ever experienced any form of recovery, whether it's from drugs or alcohol, codependence, workaholism, you know there comes a point where what was tolerable before, what was endurable before, no longer is. And the pain of staying where I was far more excruciating than the fear of the unknown and potentially, hopefully, better future. So 10 years in, and I called it quits. And I started my new life. I decided to take my people skills and my curiosity and pivot directly into the technical team as a user experience researcher. I found a UX boot camp that I signed up for, and I was fortunate enough to land a job as a junior UX researcher right out of the gate. And it's exactly that transition that little did I know, 1 year into my UX researcher role, I would quit that role and come back to tech recruiting. This time armed with a technical toolkit that changes the way we approach our conversations with our technical hiring managers and our technical counterparts, along with our candidates. And that's what we're going to cover today. So what we're going to learn today is the technical model that leverages user experience toolkit from the software development process applied to the recruiting and HR function so that we have a roadmap and a decoder ring for how to have constructive, effective, and even fun conversations with our technical counterparts. I'm Alison Daley, founder and CEO of Recruiting Innovation, and this is now my life's work. I am on a mission to enable our talent professionals to have confidence and success with their technical conversations. So let me just kind of dive in. What exactly happened for me in that year that I was on a tech team supporting a digital product and in stand-ups and sprints? Well, there's three key learnings that will cue us up for our training today. If any one of you have yet read the Brene Brown book, Atlas of the Heart, this quote is in the book. She kind of highlights it. It's by Ludwig Wittgenstein. Oh, I'm on the wrong slide. There we go. The limits of my world mean the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. And as HR professionals, we know that language is a key commodity of the things that we work with. And so, I don't know about you all, but consistently feeling like I was out of my depth and constantly feeling awkward in these conversations did not mean that it did not help me flourish, and it did not help me have a good time and stay in this industry. So this rendered me ineffective when receiving new technical roles, It rendered me mute when I knew I needed to ask deeper questions, but was afraid to let on that I didn't really know what I was talking about. And it meant that I just hovered at the surface with every interaction that I had with a technologist, which not only limits us in our position, but downstream, because of our position, it limits the impact that we can have as leaders in our organizations. And as talent professionals, language is our key commodity. So to be able to speak tech and to be able to interact with our counterparts where they are means that we're going to be able to deliver more value and be more effective as HR technical professionals. Which leads us to our second learning, that yes, there is a method to the madness of software development. So even though it seems very ephemeral or hard to understand, there's actually a very discrete 5-step workflow that all technologists follow when building software. And that's what we're going to learn today. So we're going to learn the method of the software development process so that we can understand and orient ourselves into those conversations. And then we're going to follow up with showing you effective follow-up questions that you can ask across that whole life cycle. And then a final point, and this is sort of the nexus of why we're here. Recruiters are much more like user researchers than we are order takers. Now, anyone who's ever recruited for any type of role understands that it's not as easy as taking an order for a turkey sandwich. People are more nuanced than that. Roles are more nuanced than that. And organizations are more nuanced than that. So in order to be more successful, we need to be able to ask deeper questions and be able to engage with our counterparts effectively. So what do I mean by researchers and recruiters are very similar? So I actually like to say that user researchers and recruiters are kind of two sides of the same coin. So as a UX researcher, I was on a product team, and my job was to figure out who our end users were, find them, get them to talk to me, follow the UX methodology to systematize talking to them, getting their stories, and then sharing those stories back to the team. Sounds a little familiar to the recruiting process, right? Well, what helped in my transition to user research is that there's a methodology that exists in software development, that exists in user experience design, that systematizes the process of having conversations, asking effective follow-up questions, and really gleaning a rich story from this person, either as it relates to using our product, or in our role, as it relates to their work experience. And so that's what I'm really excited about today, is that we are going to dive into the methodology within user experience design to help you have a toolkit that will enable you to have effective conversations from this day forward. So let's journey into the world of software development. Are you all ready to banish the deer in headlights feeling from your tech recruiting process? All right, well, I know I am. So this is a little bit of a washed out image, but what we see here is a very well-known visualization of the two key methodologies of software development. So what you see at the top is, and many of you probably have seen this, so apologies if I'm being redundant, but the top is the original form of software development lifecycle, which is waterfall. This is the era of IBM and Oracle and the big machines, 2.5-year projects, 4-year projects. This process got its origination in manufacturing, so everything goes in one direction. Research is done first, and then you design, then you build, then you test, and then you deploy it into the wild, and you're done. This leads to bloated projects, it leads to inefficiencies, and then by the time 2.5 years later when the product was live, the market's moved on. So about 10 years ago, they started moving to agile methodology, which takes the same 5 steps, research, design, build, test, deploy, takes the huge end product, breaks it down into smaller parts, iterative parts, and then you'll see that the design, build, test functions are kind of in a loop. They've learned to do it kind of all at the same time. So what this does is it speeds up production, it speeds up delivery, and it also speeds up learning because your learning uptake is improved in this way. So agile methodology is kind of the modern methodology. So your organization either has some form of waterfall, some form of agile, maybe a little bit of both. There's a few other methodologies as well, including lean and Kanban, but for our sakes, we're not going to go into all of that. I just want to ground you that this is the software development process. Everyone on the technical team follows this 5-step process. It demystifies it completely. So then from here, let's walk through each of excuse me. Let's walk through each of these 5 stages and learn about some of the keywords and the functions and the purposes of each of these stages, so you can really ground yourself into the workflow when you're talking to a candidate or a hiring manager about their open role, or even just interacting with your CTO at high-level executive type conversations. So, first up, research. Research is the stage where we want to make sure, let me back up for a second. So, the way projects start off in software development, you've got these big projects, and what they do is they end up slicing up parts of the project into tickets, and then tickets go into a queue, and as a developer or a technologist, I either get assigned tickets to work on, or I just pick the next ticket in the queue. And so my first job is to first understand everything that's expected of this ticket. What are the requirements? So what does it need to be able to perform? What does it need to be able to do? What are the dependencies? So what is the technology that I have to use? What kind of code does it need to fit in? Like, what does it need to look like and do in order to fit within our current ecosystem? I'm also going to be figuring out all of the use cases. So use cases are all the ways that this tool, feature, product is going to be used. So let's say we wanted to implement a chat feature on our website. So the use case would be, you can either chat directly from the website, or maybe you even log into your account in order to use the chat. So that's what the use cases are for. And lastly, user data. So me as a UX researcher, we always emphasize user data. That means that we're building for someone with a real problem that's not one of us. So who are our personas, what are their goals, what are their motivations, and how do we make sure that we deliver correctly for them? Once we've got a really good understanding of what the ticket is expecting, what the product should do, then we move on to the design stage. So during the design stage, there's lots of different elements, and depending on your seniority and how your teams are set up, some of this might land on you, some of this might not. But first and foremost with design is architecture. So if we're building a new feature, how does it sit within the current ecosystem of the technology, the stack, and how does it need to play nicely with others? Then we have our programming languages, which is something that is more common for us to know about, something like Java, .NET, JavaScript. This is basically us determining what's the best language to use in this case. Most teams already have a preset tech stack, so that's sort of determined for us. But where developers tend to have a little bit more flexibility is related to frameworks and libraries. So frameworks are a preset sort of shorthand that go with each language. So .NET has the framework of, I'm forgetting. I'm going to try to not show off for a second, but frameworks basically help shorten up the development process and create consistency in the code. Then there's libraries, which is just sort of shorthand again, but also it's important to know the tech stack. It's okay to ask that question of your dev managers. What is the tech stack we're using here? Tech stacks basically are the shorthand is saying, what are the languages, the servers, the frameworks, the databases that this organization uses? And then from there, we also, again, are making sure that we're designing for the use case as outlined in our research. So once we've done, and also just to caveat this, I'm teaching you in a waterfall method if you're noticing I'm going from one to the other, but do know you'll get a little more sophisticated and know that some of these things happen concurrently, a la Agile. But we got to start somewhere, so we're going to learn linearly. This is their job is to get in there and break what you built to see if you can find any errors. Just general quality. Then there's a process called system integration testing, known as SIT. So system integration testing is when your code is past the first QA process, and now we're going to make sure that it fits with the whole tech stack and the platform, that it's going to integrate smoothly once we hit go and deploy. Then once that's going well, then we have what we call our user acceptance testing, which is UAT. And this is when we actually have end users work with our product. So if it's maybe a mobile app for depositing checks, we're going to want to see users use the product and make sure it's really delivering for how they expect it to work. And then last but not least is test-driven development, TDD. You can get bonus points if you ask your dev manager if you work in a TDD environment. So test-driven development is a new kid on the block. It's really becoming set as the standard of development, which means you first design the test that the code will have to pass, and then you build the code, rather than build the code and try to shoehorn those tests to make it work. What that means is that as I'm coding, I can already tell if I'm on track rather than until the end and applying it backwards. So TDD is definitely the future and present now for testing. And then last but not least, we've got the deployment process. So deployment tends to live within our DevOps teams or our infrastructure teams, but that's not always the case, so take that with a grain of salt. Some key things that we want to know about are some key elements within the deploy process. You've got the installation. So now once all the code is tested, user accepted, we are going to install it into our platform in our stack. We're going to go through a process of configuration management where we take a kind of like a copy of where the code is now, so that if we do go live and it breaks, we don't have to like figure out what went wrong. We just go back to 5 minutes ago. Then we test one more time. And then another new trend, well, it's not that new anymore, but the idea of continuous integration and continuous deployment, which is CI/CD. So CI/CD is the process where developers, I'm not going to get too nerdy on it, but basically, rather than having developers build the code and then DevOps make it go live, DevOps actually creates an ecosystem for the developers to code in. And once the code automatically passes its test, it just gets deployed. So that just, as you can understand, completely speeds up the process of delivering technology and code. So CI/CD is also another cool acronym to drop to your technical team. And then last but not least, a very important keyword for us is release cycle. So every dev team has some form of a release cycle, which means they release new code in a certain cadence. So whether it's every 2 weeks, every week, once a month, or if your company is a continuous integration, continuous deployment, at any time. But we'll see that come up in our questions section. Understanding what kind of release cycle your team operates in, it is very useful information. So with that, let's move on to the fun stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring the toolkits from the user experience process and walk you through how to apply them to your conversations, whether it's talking to a technical hiring manager about headcount planning or the open roles, whether it's a technical candidate that you really need to actually add more value to and be able to tell them about the role or learn more about their experience. And then finally, what we're going to do is just help you have something that you can lean on for any type of conversation moving forward related to technology. So those two tools are, first is the journey map. This is one of my favorite journey maps from the UX design space. Carrie Bodine is a thought leader in UX. She's super awesome. This right here is what we call a user experience journey map. So the purpose of a journey map in user experience design is to basically map the journey that an end user takes between having a need and accomplishing that need as it relates to perhaps a product or a problem we're trying to solve as a product company. So for Emma has a small business. She's in this case, she's one of the personas that this shipping company is building for. And so Emma's journey map of shipping a package and using this company's software has 4 stages. So first she receives her order, then she prepares the shipment, then she drops off the package, and then she tracks the package. And then the rows that you're seeing across the way, the top row is what is she doing, the middle row is what is she thinking, and then the bottom row is how is she feeling as she's solving for each problem or challenge of each stage. So this is very useful on the UX side because then we're able to identify how do our users use our product, what goes well, what do they hate, what is not going well, and then we're able to solve for the actual needs because we're actually using real data. So you can see she had some struggles here, so we would prioritize the painful points and improve those first. But let's see what that looks like for us. So what we do at Recruiting Innovation, what I've done is then I've taken that 5-step process that we saw from the waterfall and agile method, and I applied that to the 5 stages of the journey map. So between ticket and live code, everyone on the software development team, your data scientists, your mobile engineers, your UX designers, your product managers, your DBAs, your engineers, everyone follows this model. So what you're about to learn is what you're going to be able to use to talk with any of your technologists on your team. But what we're doing here is we're grounding you in the workflow of the software development process so that you have a roadmap for these conversations. So what we have here, we have two rows to go with the columns. I have a doing and thinking section. So in the doing section, we're asking ourselves, what are the tasks and the priorities? What are the deliverables? And who are they collaborating with? And we kind of want to know that across those 5 stages. Also, because technology is a highly thinking space, we're going to want to get into their thoughts and problem-solving skills. So what are their thoughts and concerns? What problems are they trying to solve? And how do they currently solve those problems? So what we're going to do now is we're going to start to go through each of these stages and talk a little bit more about how to have more effective conversations leveraging this journey map model. Well, that's where our second tool of the UX process comes in, which is contextual interviews. So we all know behavioral interviews, right? The idea that past behavior will predict future behavior. That's useful, but that doesn't help us as recruiters or talent professionals to dig deep into someone's thought process, work experience, and technical abilities. So what we do with contextual interviews, and I'm about to show you the workflow, but the benefits of adopting a contextual interview, in addition to your behavioral interviews, if you have some favorite questions, is that this is going to create a structured outline for us to follow. It's going to give us our roadmap directions to our destination. It's going to give us a process for follow-up questions so that we don't feel dumb or mute. We're going to feel confident in asking good questions at as we follow up. And then my favorite part is it actually gets us to learn very much about a technical process in story form. We're communicators, right? We need stuff in story form. Having a bullet list of like a bunch of acronyms isn't going to help me know the spirit of this person or the spirit of the role. I need story. So this is going to teach us and show us how to pull out rich stories from our candidates. And finally, extra benefit is that when we use this combination of the journey map plus the contextual interview, we are inherently establishing credibility as someone who gets it, that understands the process, and is a partner in this process with our technical team. Okay, you ready? All right. Now, for the sake of this audience, I'm kind of double timing. So typically I train one round on technical interviews, and then I do another round on technical intakes, or those strategy meetings that we have with our hiring managers. I want to be thoughtful of our time, and I think y'all are smart enough to be able to handle both. So we're going to do 2 at a time, okay? All right, so what I love about contextual interviews is that we always start with an anchor question. So for an interview, my anchor question would be, walk me through a project that was particularly challenging. What was the goal, and how did you go about solving it? And then we wait and we listen to their first answer. Now, if this was a new role intake with for a technical role, my anchor question would be, what will be the first or most important project this role will be part of? What's the goal of the project, and how will you measure success? So you can see we're setting them up to tell us a story. We ask them, where are you going? And now let's take the journey on getting there. And what's fun is, if you listen closely, 9 times out of 10, our lovely technologists are going to start at the build stage, right? That part right in the middle, because they're technologists and that's where they live. And without this process, we might already feel like our wheels spinning off and we don't really know what's the follow-up question to ask. But the beauty is now this is where the flow kicks in, and this is where those follow-up questions anchor. So I listen to the answer. The candidate tells me, I helped implement a distributed build system. Oh, great. All right. Well, what research went into your design decisions? If you ask nothing else except for what research went into your design decisions, you will feel the candidate shift in their chair because now you've established credibility. You understand that research happens before build. And they will open up for you. It's so cool. And you can follow up and say, how did you know Java was the right tool to use? Or who did you reach out to when researching the requirements of this position, of the project? So you can see we're warming them up. We want to have the beginning, middle, and end. They wanted to start in the middle, and we said, no, let's come back to the beginning. And then, for our intake, hiring manager, same thing. We need someone to help us implement a distributed build system. Okay, cool. Well, how do you anticipate this person to get oriented into the tech stack? Are they going to be, shown around, or are they going to just poke around and learn about the technology? What dependencies will they be taking into consideration with this project? So right now I'm starting to get a feel, because not only do I want to know exactly what the hiring manager is needing for the role so I can hire the right person the first time, but guess what? Because I want to be a sophisticated technical recruiter or talent professional, I also want to give value back. So the more I understand the role, the more I'm able to share that with the candidates and get them excited. So these questions are always twofold in terms of getting what we need, but also knowing that we're trying to prepare for sharing our story back to the team. Then next up, we've got our design section of the questions. So the goal with that, from that journey map, is I'm trying to ask doing and thinking questions across that 5-stage process. Oh, interesting. Okay, well, what dependencies did you need to consider when designing the solution? Who did you collaborate with when designing the solution? You could even throw in some of those other keywords, like what was the main testing facilitated here? And you're going to get a download. They're going to have a lot to say about that. And then you can follow up with how involved will this person or this role be with testing? So again, we're not only learning more about the role, but then we're going to be able to better qualify those candidates because we actually understand the role. You can see how it's very symbiotic and lovely and partial, but obviously. And then last but not least, to our deployment stage. So during the interview, we can ask questions around what was your involvement in the deployment process? What sort of release cycle were you working with, right? Because if they're used to 6-month release cycles, that might be a little bit different for them to adjust to a 2-week release cycle. And then also, this is one of my favorite questions that almost never gets asked. Who was responsible for the code once it's live? Because it lives somewhere. Most often it's infrastructure or DevOps, but it's worth asking that question, especially if you're interviewing for one of those roles. And then on the flip side, you see those follow-up questions again for our hiring manager. So what's the release cycle here? Who's responsible for the code? And then how involved with deployment will this be? So what you're seeing here now is that there's like I said, a method to the madness. And it's kind of funny because I teach on this and it really feels very simplified, but I feel like that's a good place to start. Let's just start with some classic, simple understandings and roadmap mapping for us. Which leads me to my favorite, which is user experience design plus talent management. When it comes down to, like I said, talking with our technical hiring managers, they tend to hover in the space they're most comfortable, which is the build stage. But now that we know that there's a discrete middle, front, middle, and end, we know how to have conversations and ask them for more information. And honestly, there's no bigger compliment, I think, that we can get than from having our hiring manager say to us, that's a really good question. Let me think about that for a second. Because we're going from order taker and getting those, turkey sandwich orders to being a collaborative consultant and forcing them to think a little bit more and adding more value to their process. And what's nice is when you combine the journey map with the contextual interview template, that roadmap of those conversations are mapped out for you, so you can have more confidence, have more credibility, dig deeper, and then just overall be more successful and effective. And hopefully have more joy in your job. That was always a complaint for me, is just feeling under-resourced, feeling like I didn't speak the language, but yet every day expected to get on the phones or shoot those emails and shine, without being able to actually confidently know what I was doing. This sort of model is what basically 1 year into leaving recruiting in the dust, I was never going to come back. I thought, let's come back and bring this model to the people. So I hope that you found this information helpful. I know it was a lot of information and you probably just were trying to intake that, but I bet you also have a bunch of questions. So let me pause and ask if anyone has any questions related to follow-up questions, setting up this model, applying it in other useful ways. It was so thorough. You guys got all of it, right? Yeah. Okay, please. Oh, Want me to go back?
Yeah.
Sure.
That's all the questions. Sorry.
Which one? Which slice would you like? And actually, I think you should be able to download the slides after the presentation. I'll have my, FYI, I'll have, there's my email address.
Okay.
Happy to send anyone a deck.
Yeah.
Yes, totally have the deck. And we can even send you the template, the interview template, which is cool.
Yeah.
So for what's worth, the reason, like the way it all happened was like I was just doing this job. I kept being like, am I doing it? And my boss was like, you're doing it. And then I was like, I think I figured out how to teach recruiters how to tap technical interviews. But then the next beautiful part came when I realized that if we take this model, partner with technologists, it provides them a framework to download their subject matter expertise in story form. And so that's actually what became the crux of the tech recruiter certification that I put out. You hear directly from technologists, UX design, front end, DevOps, and you hear their journey map. Here's what I'm doing as a UXer across research, design, build, test, and deploy. And then you hear about their toolkits and things like that. So also do know that this is the training for you to do your job, but then this toolkit actually is incorporated within our technical training of the tech recruiter certification as well. So was there a specific slide, or are you going to be good seeing it later? Okay, awesome. Okay, I have one question, and I'll come to you. Yes?
Yeah, so I know you mentioned this also, how sometimes people are just pulling tickets, and more like that. So what if you're asking someone these follow-up, more in-depth questions, and they're like, I don't know, I just work on this one ticket, is it the next ticket, or the next ticket? I mean, that would show a lot about their thought process and whatnot, but I'm just curious if that comes up a lot.
Yes. Well, and that's where the anchor question comes in. So like really anchoring it on what was the most important or the most difficult project you've worked on. So that's our way of getting them to try to think critically about a more juicy project that then we can go into those other layers for. If they're more junior, they still have done some of these things, it's just going to be like a little bit of a lighter answer. Yeah, definitely. Good question, thank you. Please.
Do you ever use that to rewrite job postings the way you advertise for those jobs? I'm just thinking about what ours look like, big block of text and 12 bullets of technology after it. So
yes, very good question. Do we take what we learned here and update our job descriptions? Absolutely. I am a big believer that hiring managers are not professional job description writers. They tend to be 7 years worth of copy and paste from the last 5 jobs. And as we all know, it's a candidate market, and they're not coming to us. And so we talk a lot in our recruiting training about really creating more of a pull energy with our recruiting and sourcing than a push. And so once there's a few more tools in the toolkit, but part of that hiring manager conversation, not only are you really getting a good understanding of the role, who they're collaborating with, how they're driving value, but then you can put that at the top of the job description about the impact, the innovation, the team, the collaboration, and really, write that almost like 3-cent commercial to bring them in. And then, updating the job description to reflect more of primarily using, secondarily using as well, because laundry lists aren't getting us anywhere. So definitely updating that. And then using that same information in our outreach message, and then also when we're positioning the role to the candidate. So across the way, we're just getting our talking points, and then we line that up in our own process. Great, thank you. Yes, please.
Does this model go along with if you were doing a front-end web developer? Like, does software development go with web development structure?
Yes. Absolutely. Because web development, you're still doing the research on who are the consumers, what's the message you're trying to get, how are we going to build it, is it WordPress, is it hard-coded, is it, those other tools out there. So it's a flavor. And we can almost think about this almost applied to our process even, right? Like when we're doing a big initiative, we're going to do some research and then we'll design a solution and build it, and whether it's a job fair or, benefits aren't as fun, but something like that. And actually the idea of the workflow is what's, I think, really grounding for us as talent professionals. So like the recruiter workflow between new role and hired person, it's 6 steps, which is that intake conversation with the hiring manager, Then we do our outreach, because it's tech and they're not coming to us. We have to do our outreach messages. Then we have our phone screen, the team interview, and then offer. And we're doing and thinking certain things as we go through that flow. And so I'm also have seen this show up in different ways with other kinds of recruiting, where it's like, things feel abstract, but if we just distill them down into workflows, it really liberates us to just like simplify and have more confidence in that way. Thank you.
What would be your suggestion for taking these types of questions, which are absolutely fantastic from a development standpoint, but then translating them over into areas like that aren't so software related, like your network engineers, your systems administrators, kind of that side of like the hardware piece instead of software?
Yes, I think, you know, it's somewhat similar. I feel like, you know, I know it sounds simplified, but it really is kind of the flow of most technology, but it would be a different application, right? Because it's maybe not so much the research, maybe you already know what you need to do, but then you have to design it around where are the power outlets or things like that. I haven't delved too hard into the infrastructure side on seeing how this applies, but I have had positive feedback from folks that it's translatable, yes, but it is slightly different, that's true. Yeah, thank you. Cool. Anyone? Oh, please, yes, please.
Within the software development lifecycle, where would you say Scrum meetings are, where does that fall?
Oh, good one. Oh man, Scrum is such a weird, like like little spiders in the web, just like making sure everyone's managed. You know, I think that the Scrum meetings are going to be more around like that sort of the research design build process. I'm not sure how, I think Scrum probably comes, it depends on how into research the organization is, but it's going to be more, you know, making sure that I'd actually almost say it's even more building and testing, because the idea of the Scrum is just, what are your blocks, what you get done, what do you need to get done today, right? So I think that that's in that space. And I would say actually probably Scrum managers would be a little bit off this workflow. They'll be a little bit different. Although the product management folks go through this workflow too. So yeah, we've got some, it's almost like there's concentric circles of application. And so Scrum would be like a little one circle out. Same with our infrastructure people. Yeah. Great. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, I hope you found the content useful. It really lights me up to be back in recruiting. It really is so funny. 1 year in, I was like, I gotta come back. And so I can't quit you. So now I call myself accidental recruiter. I've fallen into this industry 4 times and I've picked it 3 times and now I'm not going anywhere. So if you're interested, my colleague Giselle back here has printouts of our ebook on technical interviews, how to make technical placements 20% faster. It outlines those 5 key steps and the interview questions that we ask, plus has a nice little overview on the different roles and some technology cheat sheets. And then if you're interested at all, also, we have a booth. I'm happy to share more. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm Alison Daley from Recruiting Innovation. Thank you.